When Rome began to fade, it did not vanish all at once. Empires rarely die cleanly, they dissolve like candle wax, their light pooling into smaller flames scattered across the dark. And among those fading lights, one would refuse to go out. It would shift, change shape, and begin to burn anew, and somehow eternal. That light would become Byzantium. The story begins in the 4th century, when the old world was cracking. The once mighty Roman Empire groaned under the weight of its own vastness. Civil wars raged between generals who sought the purple. Barbarians pressed against borders that had once seemed unbreakable. The gods of old were silent, and a new faith whispered from catacombs and temples alike, promising salvation beyond the grave. In this world of ruin and revelation stood one man, Constantine. Born in the provinces, raised among soldiers, and baptized by battle, Constantine was both the last Roman and the first of something new. He dreamed not merely of ruling an empire, but of transforming it. And in the year 312, on the eve of battle, it is said that he looked up into the heavens and saw a sign, a cross of light, and words that read, "In this sign, conquer." The next morning, he marched beneath the Christian symbol, defeated his rival, and became the sole ruler of Rome. But Constantine was not content to rule the ruins. He needed a new heart for the empire, a city untouched by the decay of centuries, a place where faith and order might live side by side. He found it at the meeting point of worlds, on a narrow peninsula where Europe and Asia reached out to touch one another across the waters of the Bosporus. There, on the bones of an ancient Greek colony called Byzantium, he would raise his dream in marble. The city would be called Nova Roma, New Rome, but the world would remember it by another name, Constantinople. In 330 AD, the city was consecrated. Trumpets sounded across the sea as golden eagles were carried through marble streets. Statues of emperors long dead were brought from every corner of the old empire, lining the avenues like a silent guard of honor. But above them all stood the new symbol of power, the cross, gleaming beneath the morning sun. Constantinople was no mere city. It was an idea cast in stone. Where Rome had been the empire of conquest, Constantinople would be the empire of faith. Here, Constantine gathered artists, builders, and priests. He filled his city with marble from Greece, columns from Egypt, and bronze from the temples of Apollo. The result was a city both ancient and newborn, the body of Rome reborn with the soul of Christendom. The streets ran straight and wide, flanked by colonnades and arches. In its heart rose the Augusteum, a vast square crowned with statues and domes. Nearby stood the great palace, shimmering with mosaics that caught the light like fireflies. Beyond it, the hippodrome echoed with the roar of crowds, chariots thundering past in colors of blue and green. At night, oil lamps reflected off the marble so that the city seemed to float upon its own light. From the sea, sailors said they could see the domes shining like stars, a constellation fallen to earth. Constantine died not long after his vision was realized. But what he built would outlive him by 1,000 years. His successors took up the task of shaping this new Rome into the eternal city it was meant to be. In the centuries that followed, emperors rose and fell like the tides that lapped against the city's sea walls. Some were philosophers, others tyrants. Some prayed while others plotted. But all were bound by the same conviction, that Constantinople was not merely their home, but the world's last refuge of order. In the great libraries of the city, the wisdom of Greece and Rome was gathered, copied, and preserved. While the western provinces crumbled and the Latin tongue fell silent, in the east the words of Homer and Plato still echoed. The Byzantines called themselves Romaeoi, Romans, not because of blood, but because of spirit. Their empire stretched from the mountains of Armenia to the deserts of Egypt, from the Balkans to the shores of the Black Sea. At its height, it was a tapestry of languages and faiths, stitched together by the golden thread of the emperor's will. Yet Byzantium was more than its borders. It was a vision of balance, between heaven and earth, power and piety, sword and scripture. Its art glowed with a stillness that seemed almost divine. Faces of saints and angels gazed from the walls of churches with eyes that saw beyond time. Gold backgrounds shimmered not to imitate light, but to reveal it, as if the divine were seeping gently into the world. By the 6th century, under the rule of Emperor Justinian, the empire reached its zenith. He was a man of law, ambition, and faith, and beneath his gaze, Constantinople became a masterpiece. He sought to restore the glory of the old empire and, for a brief moment, succeeded. His generals, Belisarius and Narses, reconquered North Africa and Italy, while his architects reshaped the skyline of the capital itself. It was Justinian who built the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, a marvel so vast and luminous that visitors thought they had stepped into the kingdom of heaven itself. When sunlight poured through its dome, it seemed to float upon air. "Solomon, I have surpassed thee," Justinian is said to have declared, and none who stood beneath that vast canopy could doubt it. Within its walls, the empire prayed. Priests in robes of gold chanted hymns that rose like incense, curling toward the dome where Christ looked down in silent majesty. The echoes of those chants lingered long after the voices had faded, a reminder that Byzantium's strength was not only in its armies, but in its soul. Justinian also codified the laws of Rome, distilling centuries of decrees into the Corpus Juris Civilis, the foundation upon which modern law still rests. To him, empire was not mere power, it was divine order, a mirror of heaven upon earth. Yet even golden ages carry shadows. The same Justinian who raised cathedrals also unleashed fire upon his own people. When the Nika riots swept through the city, born from chariot factions turned revolutionaries, half of Constantinople burned. Tens of thousands died beneath the swords of the emperor's guards. When the smoke cleared, Justinian rebuilt, grander than before, as if destruction itself were but another form of creation. Outside the city, the world shifted once more. Plagues ravaged the empire, and enemies pressed upon its borders. The Persians advanced from the east, the tribes of the steppe descended from the north. But the empire endured. Its secret was not conquest, but resilience, the ability to bend without breaking, to adapt without surrender. And through it all, the city remained unassailable. The Theodosian walls, a triple line of stone and moat, guarded Constantinople like a ring of iron. For centuries, no army breached them. Earthquakes shook them, siege engines battered them, but still they stood. As the centuries turned, Byzantium transformed. The old Latin faded from its churches. The Greek tongue returned, flowing through scripture and song. The empire became less Roman, more Hellenic, yet never ceased to call itself Roman. It was a paradox made flesh, a relic of the past, forever remaking itself. Its emperors ruled by divine right, crowned in ceremonies that blended the rites of church and state. The emperor was more than a man, he was the image of God's order on earth. In the great palace, beneath ceilings of gold and marble, the court glittered like a vision of paradise. Foreign envoys described it as a dream made solid, jeweled thrones, mechanical birds that sang, fountains that ran with wine. But beneath the splendor lay a constant awareness of fragility. Byzantium was a miracle sustained by faith, diplomacy, and trade, a delicate equilibrium between powers that envied and emulated it. To the west, the rising kingdoms of Europe looked upon it with suspicion and awe. To the east, the caliphates grew strong, spreading a new faith across the sands. In the 7th century, Islam's armies struck like lightning. Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, the ancient heartlands of empire, fell within a generation. The Byzantines reeled, but did not collapse. They withdrew into the mountains of Anatolia and fought on. From the ashes of loss arose a new kind of strength, smaller, but harder, tempered like steel. The empire survived because it learned to fight differently. It forged the themes, military provinces where farmers became soldiers, and soldiers became defenders of their own land. It built fleets that mastered the secret of Greek fire, a weapon that burned upon water, blinding and terrifying its enemies. And once more, the Golden City endured. In Constantinople, the mosaics glowed through the smoke of battle. Children grew up beneath the sound of bells and cannon, knowing that beyond those walls lay a world forever shifting, forever hungry. Yet inside, time seemed to move differently. The empire endured by remembering, by believing that it was chosen, the last guardian of the true faith, the final heir to Rome's immortal light. Byzantium had become more than an empire. It was a state of mind, half prayer, half defiance. A dream carved in marble, standing between earth and heaven, between the past and the unknowable future. And though the storms would grow darker, and the world beyond its walls would soon change forever, the empire's heart still beat, slow, steady, and radiant beneath the eternal dome of the Hagia Sophia. It was the sound of faith surviving the centuries. The empire that dreamed in marble had only just begun to dream. Part 2, The Age of Icons and the Golden Light of Empire. The marble dream endured. Even as the winds of time swept across the centuries, Byzantium still shone like a solitary lamp in the darkness. But lamps require oil, and faith, like empire, must be tended, or it flickers and wanes. The 7th century brought both revelation and reckoning. The empire, carved by centuries of conquest, now found itself besieged from every direction. The Arabs, guided by a new faith and fire, surged across the deserts, their banners proclaiming that there is no God but God. Within decades, they seized the ancient provinces of Egypt and Syria, lands that had once fed and sustained the Byzantine heart. The loss was not merely territorial, it was spiritual. Jerusalem, cradle of their faith, fell to another creed. The Byzantines watched from afar as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stood beneath a foreign sky. For the first time in living memory, the empire was no longer master of the Christian world. But within its walls, Constantinople endured, luminous and defiant. For 700 years, no invader would breach its mighty defenses. When the Arab fleets sailed against it, the sea itself became their enemy. The Byzantines unleashed a weapon so fearsome that legend would cloak it in myth, Greek fire. It was a substance born of secrecy, said to be gifted by an angel or conjured by a philosopher. It clung to water and burned upon it, spreading waves of flame across the sea. Witnesses spoke of ships igniting in an instant, their crews leaping into a sea that itself blazed like molten glass. The empire's enemies came to fear it as divine wrath, a miracle of destruction that guarded the city of God. And yet, even as it survived from without, the empire began to fracture within. In the heart of Constantinople, among the incense and marble, a question arose that would divide the empire for a century: could the divine be painted? Could the face of God be captured by human hand? Thus began the age of the iconoclasts, the breakers of images. In the year 726, Emperor Leo III issued a decree that shook the empire's soul. Icons, he declared, were idols. The images of Christ and the saints, the golden mosaics that adorned the churches, the painted panels before which generations had prayed, all were to be destroyed. In one night, soldiers climbed ladders into the sanctuaries and tore the faces of angels from the walls. The mosaics of Christ Pantocrator were smashed, their golden fragments swept into the dust. Monks wept in silence as the empire turned upon its own reflection. But not all obeyed. In the monasteries of Mount Athos, hidden deep in the mountains, the faithful preserved the art of the icon in secret. They painted by candlelight, their brushes moving in prayer. Each image became an act of defiance, each color a whisper of hope. For more than 100 years, the empire tore itself apart over what could be seen and what must remain unseen. Families divided, churches burned, emperors fell, and still the debate raged: could the infinite dwell within the finite? When the dust finally settled in the year 843, under the regency of Empress Theodora, the icons returned. Churches were restored, mosaics gleamed once more beneath the flicker of oil lamps, and the empire breathed again. The restoration of the icons was celebrated as a second resurrection, the victory of light over shadow, of spirit over fear. It marked not just the end of a heresy, but the beginning of renewal. The Byzantines entered an age of learning and beauty unlike any before, a renaissance born not of conquest, but of reflection. The empire that had once fought to survive began to dream again. In the 9th and 10th centuries, the Macedonian dynasty rose to power, ushering in what later historians would call the Byzantine Golden Age. These emperors, descended from soldiers and peasants, ruled with vision and strength. They rebuilt the army, restored the laws, and revived the ancient arts of Greece. Under Basil I and his successors, Constantinople became the jewel of the world, the richest, most learned city on earth. Its markets overflowed with silk and spice, ivory and gold. Merchants from Arabia, Venice, and Rus came to trade in its shadowed bazaars, where Greek philosophers debated beside Persian astrologers. The city glittered with marble palaces and gardens perfumed with myrtle. Fountains murmured in courtyards where scholars read Aristotle beneath the scent of roses. Within the great palace, mosaics covered every wall and floor, scenes of emperors crowned by angels, lions carved in onyx, and peacocks drinking from silver pools. The Hagia Sophia still stood at the city's heart, its dome vast as heaven, its mosaics shimmering with divine calm. Beneath it, the empire's soul pulsed, a blend of faith, philosophy, and beauty unmatched anywhere in the known world. The Byzantines believed their city was a mirror of paradise, a reflection of celestial order. The emperor, crowned in gold and purple, was the earthly image of divine authority. His court rituals were choreographed like liturgy, ambassadors bowed thrice, choirs sang, and automata, mechanical birds and lions, moved and roared as if alive. To the foreign eye, it was sorcery. To the Byzantines, it was harmony, the material world made to echo the divine. In this golden age, art flourished. Icons returned to every church and home, their faces serene, their halos burning with quiet fire. Manuscripts were illuminated with gold and azure, their letters flowing like water. Architects raised new churches whose domes seemed to float upon light. The Byzantine spirit, half prayer, half intellect, reached its peak. Philosophy and theology intertwined, science and scripture spoke the same language. In their schools, scholars debated not whether the earth was flat, but the nature of motion and the heavens. Mathematics, astronomy, and medicine thrived alongside the study of the soul. The city's libraries became sanctuaries of memory. In quiet chambers, monks copied the words of Plato, Aristotle, Sophocles, and Ptolemy. Their hands preserved the ancient world, letter by letter, scroll by scroll. What they saved would one day awaken the Renaissance in lands yet unborn. Beyond the capital, the empire expanded once more. Under Basil II, the Bulgar slayer, the Byzantine army conquered the Balkans, subdued Armenia, and reached the gates of Syria. For the first time in centuries, the empire stood secure from threat. And yet, Basil himself was no tyrant of conquest. He lived simply, slept little, and ruled with iron discipline. His enemies feared him, but his soldiers worshipped him. He died in 1025, leaving behind a treasury overflowing with gold and a realm more powerful than any since Justinian. When his body was laid to rest, it was said that the people of Constantinople wept openly in the streets. For they knew, though they could not yet name it, that an age was ending. After Basil, the empire began to soften. Luxury replaced labor, and faith grew ornate. The marble dream began to shimmer with fatigue. Yet even in decline, Byzantium glowed brighter than any kingdom that surrounded it. In the west, knights rode beneath banners of iron, in the east, caliphs raised cities of sand. But in Constantinople, the bells still tolled above domes of gold, and the sea walls still glittered in the sun. Travelers from distant lands wrote of a city beyond imagination. The Russian envoy who first saw it returned home trembling, saying, "We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth." And so, from that vision, an entire faith would take root. The Orthodox Church, carried by Byzantine priests, would shape the soul of Russia, Serbia, and Bulgaria, long after the empire itself had faded. Byzantium had become not just a city, but a seed. Its language, its art, its theology, its dream, all would outlive it. But in the marble corridors of its palaces, few foresaw the gathering storm. For beyond the mountains, new powers were stirring, Normans in the west, Turks in the east, and most perilous of all, the ambitions of a Latin church that now claimed to be the heart of Christendom. The empire that dreamed in marble had survived by balance, between east and west, between cross and crown, between the old and the new. But balance, once broken, cannot easily be restored. The flame that had once burned so bright would soon flicker again. And this time, the danger would not come from without, but from within the faith it had helped to create. As night fell over the Bosporus, the domes of Constantinople still glowed like embers, reflecting in the dark water below. The empire slept, dreaming still, unaware that its greatest trial had yet to come. The marble walls of Constantinople glimmered beneath the rising sun like the surface of calm water. From afar, the domes and spires shimmered with a light that seemed not entirely of this world. The city was alive, not just with merchants and monks, but with the hum of an empire that believed itself eternal. For 1,000 years, Byzantium stood as a dream carved into stone. And yet, like all dreams, even marble fades with time. The centuries that followed Justinian's reign were neither decline nor glory, but an endless oscillation between them, a dance of ruin and renewal. The empire would fracture, heal, and fracture again, as if its heartbeat were tied to the whims of heaven. Its enemies multiplied. Its faith deepened. And through every siege and storm, the city's golden heart refused to stop beating. Beyond the Bosporus, empires rose and fell like waves. The Arabs came first, swift and burning, their crescent banners fluttering across the deserts and into the Mediterranean. Within a century of Muhammad's death, they had built a realm that stretched from Spain to India. And Byzantium, that ancient Roman remnant, found itself staring into the eyes of a new world, one united by faith, not blood. When the caliph's armies swept into Anatolia, it seemed the empire's days were numbered. Constantinople was besieged twice, once in the 7th century, and again in the 8th, but each time, the city endured. The secret of her survival lay not just in her walls but in her spirit. Her defenders wielded a weapon born from the sea itself, Greek fire, a mysterious liquid flame that clung to water and devoured ships whole. In the quiet before each dawn, the sea outside the Golden Horn shimmered with oil and ash. The Byzantines watched the horizon with eyes hollow from sleepless nights, while priests carried icons through the streets, their candles flickering in the wind. Faith and fire became the twin shields of the empire, unseen hands that held back the darkness. Inside the palaces, emperors ruled like chess players, every move a blend of brilliance and desperation. Heraclius, one of Byzantium's most formidable rulers, rode through deserts and mountains to reclaim lands lost to Persia. His victory seemed touched by divine favor, and yet, only a generation later, those same lands fell to Islam. The empire's boundaries shrank, but its soul endured, reshaped by loss into something harder, more enduring, more Byzantine. It was during this era that the empire turned inward. The age of icons began, images painted not just with pigment but with prayer. These holy portraits became windows between earth and heaven. Yet even sacred art could divide men. When emperors declared that icons were idolatry, soldiers stormed monasteries, burning frescoes and smashing mosaics. The empire tore at itself, not over gold or land, but over the nature of divine sight. The iconoclast controversy lasted for more than a century. In quiet cloisters, monks hid paintings behind false walls. Mothers wept as soldiers stripped images from churches. But in the end, the icons returned, carried back into Hagia Sophia by a triumphant empress. When light touched the restored mosaics once more, it was as if the city itself exhaled. The 9th and 10th centuries became an age of rebirth. Out of the ashes of her own divisions, Byzantium rose renewed. Her scholars copied the wisdom of Plato and Aristotle, her merchants filled the harbors with silks, spices, and glass. In the shadow of her domes, language, law, and learning intertwined, preserving the legacy of a world that the West had already forgotten. And from this marble cradle, art bloomed again. Mosaics shimmered like frozen stars, manuscripts glowed with gold leaf and lapis blue. Every surface seemed to whisper eternity. The Byzantines believed they were the keepers of the true Rome, not the fallen one of the Caesars, but the sanctified Rome of heaven's empire. In the quiet of the night, the city hummed with chants that had echoed since Constantine's time. Incense curled through corridors. Monks recited psalms by the dim light of oil lamps. Outside the city walls, wolves howled in the forests of Thrace. But within, the rhythm of prayer never ceased. The Macedonian dynasty brought the empire back to its golden heights. Under Basil II, the Bulgar slayer, Byzantium reached from the Danube to the Euphrates once again. The emperor himself was a man of steel and silence, sleeping on the bare ground even within his palace. He waged war not for glory but for endurance, believing the empire's strength lay in its order, not its splendor. Under his rule, the treasury overflowed, the army was disciplined, and the people whispered that God himself had restored the Roman majesty. But no empire stands forever. After Basil's death, Byzantium began to drift. The palace filled with intrigue. Eunuchs and courtiers fought for power while the provinces crumbled. The armies that once guarded Anatolia weakened, and a new power stirred beyond the horizon, the Seljuk Turks. At Manzikert, in 1071, the empire's illusion of invincibility shattered. The Byzantine army, once feared across continents, was broken by the Turks in a single afternoon. The emperor, Romanos Diogenes, was captured, humiliated by enemies who once trembled at his name. Anatolia, the empire's heartland, was lost. In its place rose a new world, one that no emperor could fully control. In Constantinople, the people mourned not with tears but with silence. The mosaic still gleamed, the bells still rang, but something essential had shifted. The empire was no longer the radiant center of the world. It was an island of light in a sea of rising darkness. Yet even then, Byzantium refused to die. The Komnenian emperors, Alexios, John, and Manuel, rebuilt what they could. They forged alliances, invited Western knights to fight the Turks, and turned diplomacy into an art form. But those same knights, the Crusaders, would soon reveal a darker face. The First Crusade passed through the city like a flood of steel and prayer. Pilgrims and warriors crowded the streets, gazing at Hagia Sophia in awe. They came as allies, but Byzantium saw them for what they were, strangers who spoke of holy war with the eyes of merchants. Alexios Komnenos played his game carefully. He fed their armies, guided their march, and reclaimed lost lands in their wake. For a time, it seemed the empire had outwitted the West once more. But distrust lingered. The Latin and Greek worlds no longer spoke the same spiritual language. Their faiths shared a name but not a soul. In the centuries that followed, this divide grew like a wound. The schism between Rome and Constantinople became complete, the church split forever. The Byzantines mourned this break not as a political loss but as the severing of heaven itself. The empire was now truly alone. Still, the city endured, marble, gold, and light, dreaming of the days when emperors ruled the known world. Its scholars continued to illuminate manuscripts. Its people whispered of destiny. Its cathedral still sang. But beyond the walls, a storm gathered. The West, once barbarian, had grown powerful. The crusades that Byzantium had once supported now turned their eyes toward her treasures. And so, one April morning in the year 1204, the nightmare began. The Fourth Crusade, meant to reclaim the Holy Land, turned instead upon Constantinople. Ships filled the horizon, bearing Christian banners that should have been allies. When the walls fell, the city burned for 3 days. Churches were stripped of their relics. Icons were shattered, chalices stolen, nuns and priests slain. The greatest city of Christendom was torn apart by those who called themselves its brothers. It was the end of the Byzantine Golden Age. Yet even in ruin, the city refused to die. Fragments of the empire lived on, in Nicaea, in Trebizond, in the islands of the Aegean. Like embers scattered by the wind, they glowed quietly in the dark. For half a century, the Latins ruled Constantinople, but they could never truly possess her. The city's spirit remained Byzantine, waiting patiently for resurrection. And when the Greeks returned in 1261, led by Michael VIII Palaiologos, they found a ghost of their former glory. Hagia Sophia stood scarred but unbroken. The streets were silent, the palaces hollow. Yet the people lit their candles once again, and for a moment, the marble dream flickered back to life. But it was only a whisper of the past. The trade routes that once fed the empire now belonged to Venice and Genoa. The Ottoman Turks were rising across the straits, their armies disciplined, their faith unshaken. Byzantium had become a memory sustained by ritual, a fragile echo of the eternal empire it once claimed to be. Still, in the fading light of the 14th century, the monks of Mount Athos chanted in the old tongue. Scholars copied Plato by hand, their ink-stained fingers trembling in the candlelight. They believed that as long as knowledge endured, Byzantium could never truly die. For even as her borders collapsed, her spirit had already begun to migrate into the hearts of men who would one day call themselves Renaissance thinkers. The wisdom preserved by her libraries, the beauty guarded by her artists, and the mysticism of her faith, all of it would find new soil in the West. The empire had dreamed in marble, and though the marble would crumble, the dream would outlive it. The story of Byzantium was never only about conquest or loss. It was about endurance, the ability of an idea to survive the fall of cities. From the ashes of her cathedrals, new worlds would rise. From the ruin of her empire, new faiths would find voice. And from the silence of her final centuries, the whispers of beauty, order, and divine longing would echo forever. For even when her banners were torn, and her last emperor knelt beneath foreign stars, the spirit of Byzantium, luminous, fragile, eternal, would continue to shine, somewhere beyond the walls, where all dreams of marble are born. The morning of May 29 began like any other day beneath the marble domes of Constantinople. The Sea of Marmara shimmered pale silver, the gulls turned in slow, endless circles, and the breeze that came down from the Bosporus still smelled faintly of spring. But beyond the walls, an empire was dying. 57 days of siege had brought the city to its knees. The once unbreakable Theodosian walls stood cracked and trembling. In their shadows, the last defenders of Rome prayed, not for victory anymore, but for remembrance. Inside the city, bells rang through empty streets. Their sound was not the rhythm of war, but of mourning. Families gathered around icons and candles, whispering ancient prayers. Every home had become a chapel. Every tear a relic. The people knew that what was coming was not just another conquest, it was the ending of a world that had lasted for 1,000 years. At the Hagia Sophia, the emperor walked alone. Constantine XI Palaiologos, last of his name, last emperor of Byzantium, moved beneath the golden mosaics that once reflected the light of eternity. Now that light had dimmed. He placed his hand upon the cold marble columns, the same stone that Justinian had touched a millennium before, when he proclaimed, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." The echo of that ancient boast seemed bitter now, like the memory of an age that had forgotten its own mortality. Outside, the walls burned red with torches. The army of the Sultan encircled the city like a storm that had been waiting 1,000 years. Mehmed, barely 21, stood before his tents, a conqueror in the making, a man who believed himself chosen by destiny. He looked toward the domes of the city, rising like the ghosts of old gods, and whispered a vow that history would not forget, either I take this city, or this city takes me. All through the night, drums thundered like the beating of some vast heart. The Ottomans prepared their final assault. Priests moved through the streets, offering absolution to the defenders. Soldiers knelt with swords laid across their knees. They were merchants, fishermen, scholars, and monks, citizens turned warriors by the weight of despair. They knew that when the sun rose, their world would end. Constantine mounted his horse. His armor was patched and dented, his face hollow with sleeplessness. He rode along the ramparts, greeting his men by name. "Brothers," he said softly, "we have come to the moment for which we were born. Remember our ancestors, remember our faith, remember that we fight not for walls or stones, but for the soul of our people." And then, almost as if speaking to himself, he murmured, "God will not let me live as emperor if I cannot die as one." When dawn broke, the sky burned crimson. The first cannon roared, a monstrous voice of iron that shook the earth. Smoke rose in dark pillars over the Golden Horn. The walls trembled. The assault had begun. Waves of men hurled themselves forward, shouting the name of their god. Arrows darkened the sky. Greek fire blazed across the battlements. The defenders fought like lions trapped in a shrinking cage, hurling stones, pouring oil, praying between every breath. Hour after hour, the storm grew. The air filled with the roar of war and the stench of blood. The giant cannon that Mehmed called Basilica thundered again, its shot smashing stone and bone alike. Still the city held. Still the banners of the double-headed eagle fluttered in the wind, symbols of a world refusing to die. In the midst of chaos, Constantine fought hand-to-hand beside his men. He was no longer emperor, only a soldier among soldiers. When his sword broke, he drew another. When that one snapped, he fought with his bare hands. No one knows the exact moment of his death. Some say he vanished beneath a tide of enemies, others claim he still fights, invisible, in the ruins of the city. The truth was buried beneath centuries of dust, but his courage remained, carved into the memory of all who survived. When the Ottomans broke through the final gate, the Empire of Byzantium ceased to exist. The invaders poured into the city, their cries echoing through the streets that had once heard the hymns of emperors. Churches were looted, palaces burned, and the voices of the faithful were silenced beneath the clash of swords. At the Hagia Sophia, the great doors were forced open. The people had gathered inside, clutching their icons, their children, their faith. The dome shimmered with candlelight, as priests raised the chalice one last time. And then, as the first Ottoman soldier stepped inside, the chant was swallowed by silence. The sanctuary of God became the mosque of the conqueror. The age of marble had ended. When Mehmed entered the city, he dismounted before the great church. The streets around him were strewn with broken crosses and shattered mosaics. He looked up at the dome, the crown of Byzantine genius, and for a moment, even he seemed humbled. The young sultan walked to the altar, gazed upon the ruined icons, and whispered, "The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars, the owl calls the watch in the towers of Afrasiab." Words of sorrow, not triumph. He saw, as all conquerors must, that victory is only another kind of mourning. The city was his, but its spirit belonged to eternity. Constantinople had fallen, yet Byzantium had not truly died. For centuries to come, its music, its theology, its art, and its dreams would ripple outward, into the Renaissance, into the cathedrals of Italy, into the laws and liturgies of distant lands. Scholars fled westward carrying ancient manuscripts, their knowledge lighting the fires of rebirth in Europe. The empire that dreamed in marble became the invisible architect of a new age. As twilight fell that evening, the Bosporus lay still. Smoke drifted above the domes. The sunset turned the sea to gold, as if the earth itself was offering its final prayer. Somewhere, beneath the rubble, the last embers of Rome flickered quietly, unwilling to fade. History would call it a fall, but in truth, it was a transformation. The world that ended in that May sunrise did not vanish, it changed its shape. Byzantium had always been a bridge between worlds, Greek and Roman, Christian and pagan, East and West. Even in ruin, it remained what it had always been, the mirror of eternity, where empires rise and crumble, yet the dream of beauty endures. The marble domes would one day echo with new prayers. The mosaics would glint again beneath the light of oil lamps. And far away, in lands that had never seen Constantinople, poets and painters would still whisper its name with wonder. For an empire is not made only of walls or soldiers. It is made of longing. And that longing did not die. It traveled across time like a hidden ember, carried in the hearts of those who remembered, the idea that somewhere, beyond the reach of darkness, there stood a city of gold, built not of stone but of spirit. Byzantium had dreamed of eternity. And in that dream, it succeeded. For as long as marble gleams in sunlight, as long as domes rise above rivers, as long as mankind seeks beauty amid the ruins, Byzantium lives. Its empire is gone, but its vision remains. A memory carved in light. A song still echoing across the centuries. The empire that dreamed in marble, still dreams. The city lies in silence. The wind moves softly through broken archways where mosaics once shimmered like captured dawn. The banners of conquerors rise above Hagia Sophia, but beneath the shadow of its great dome, the whisper of older prayers still lingers. The empire has fallen, but the dream has not died. From the ashes of Constantinople's last embers, a new kind of light begins to wander across the world, faint, flickering, yet persistent. It carries with it the breath of centuries, the hum of chants, the reflection of gold leaf on sacred walls. Byzantium, though broken in stone, endures in the mind. It becomes less a place, and more an idea. In Italy, the scholars who fled the doomed city carry with them scrolls, manuscripts, and the wisdom of 1,000 years. Among them are philosophers who once debated theology beneath the porches of the great palace, mathematicians who studied the movement of the heavens, artists who learned to make pigment dance like light. They arrive in Florence, in Venice, in Rome, exiles of an empire that dreamed too long in marble. They teach the West to remember what it had forgotten, that beauty can be divine reason made visible, that faith can be geometry, that the world can be redeemed through knowledge and art. From these refugees, the Italian Renaissance takes its breath. Greek becomes the language of rebirth. Plato walks again in the halls of Florence. And behind every brushstroke of Raphael, behind every column of Bramante, behind every verse of Dante's disciples, the ghost of Byzantium lingers, serene, unhurried, immortal. The Renaissance painters who study Byzantine icons do not merely imitate their faces, they absorb their silence. In those gold backgrounds and gentle halos lives the same light that once illuminated the domes of Constantinople. Yet the memory of Byzantium's fall never leaves Europe's conscience. It haunts the Western kings who watched the queen of cities collapse. For centuries they had prayed that the empire would stand as a bulwark between Christendom and the crescent. When it fell, it seemed that the old order itself had cracked, as if heaven had allowed marble to melt. But Byzantium's fall was not the end of faith. It was its transformation. In the lands of the Orthodox East, the spirit of the empire survives through ritual and prayer. Moscow proclaims itself the Third Rome, inheritor of the two that fell. The Tsars cloak themselves in purple robes reminiscent of imperial ceremony, their churches rise beneath onion domes inspired by Hagia Sophia's vast hemisphere. The Byzantines are gone, yet their vision of a world where throne and altar mirror heaven remains. The great liturgies of the Orthodox Church continue in Greek, Slavonic, and Georgian, their chants still echo the tones sung in Justinian's basilicas. Each time the priest lifts the chalice and the incense curls upward, Byzantium breathes again. The empire's territory is gone, but its theology, the belief that beauty itself is a pathway to God, survives unchanged. Through centuries of conquest and change, this spiritual continuity becomes Byzantium's true dominion. Its empire shifts from geography to imagination. Every monastery that preserves an illuminated manuscript, every scholar who whispers a Greek phrase, every pilgrim who stands awed beneath a dome filled with golden light, all become subjects of the empire that no sword could erase. It lives not in marble, but in memory. Even in the heart of the Ottoman capital, the conquerors who took the city cannot escape its aura. The Sultan who ordered Hagia Sophia's conversion into a mosque walks through its marble floor in silence. He looks upward into the dome where light glows like the breath of God, and though the symbols change, the architecture remains a prayer. He senses that this was no ordinary church, but a meeting place between heaven and earth. The Ottomans, too, inherit the empire's grandeur. They take its roads, its palaces, its laws, and make them their own. In time, the Byzantines' legacy flows through their veins as well, the architecture, the mosaics, the art of empire. The conqueror becomes the custodian of the conquered. Centuries pass. The empire of marble becomes an empire of ink. Western travelers, scholars, poets, and dreamers begin to rediscover Byzantium through fragments. Ruined columns stand half buried in ivy, faded icons glow faintly in candlelight. In dim monasteries atop Mount Athos, monks preserve scrolls that the world has forgotten. Their inked Greek letters, fragile and trembling, hold the wisdom of worlds that believed knowledge was a form of worship. To modern eyes, Byzantium becomes a paradox. Some call it a theocracy, others an empire of mystery and decadence. But those who listen closely hear something else, the heartbeat of endurance. For more than 1,000 years, the empire survived between continents, between faiths, between worlds. It was never just a continuation of Rome, nor simply the first Christian state. It was a dream of perfection in an imperfect world. A vision carved into stone and sung into liturgy. Even as its emperors fought wars and signed decrees, they believed their capital was an image of the celestial city described in Revelation, the New Jerusalem. Each dome mirrored the heavens, each mosaic reflected divine harmony. The empire dreamed in marble because it believed eternity could be built. Its architects measured walls in cubits of prayer. Its artists painted faces that never aged, for they represented souls illuminated by God. In their devotion to form, they turned faith into architecture and art into theology. When the walls finally fell, when the empire vanished into dust, the dream did not. It drifted westward, like a spark carried by wind, igniting minds that would transform Europe forever. The printing presses of the Renaissance spread Greek texts once preserved in Constantinople's libraries. Philosophers rediscovered Aristotle and Plotinus through Byzantine commentaries. Astronomers traced the stars using diagrams copied by monks who never saw the heavens except through the lattice of domes. In this way, Byzantium seeded the modern world. Yet something deeper remains, beyond the manuscripts and mosaics. It is the strange stillness of the empire, the sense that time itself once slowed there. To walk through a Byzantine church, even now, is to step into a world that moves differently. Light changes pace. Silence thickens into gold. Every sound, a footstep, a breath, feels sanctified. It is as though the empire taught the world not merely how to rule, but how to be still. In the modern age, when empires rise and fall in a matter of decades, Byzantium stands as a quiet rebuke. It endured for more than 1,000 years. Not because it was invincible, but because it understood continuity as an art. Its people believed that stability itself could be holy. The mosaic might crack, the marble might crumble, but the pattern, the order, remains. That is Byzantium's secret. Its beauty is not in survival, but in resurrection. Every few centuries, humanity rediscovers it, in the glint of an icon, in the echo of a chant, in the shadow of a dome. In our own time, historians and artists return once more to the golden age of Constantinople. They trace the delicate tesserae of forgotten mosaics, study the curved geometry of Hagia Sophia, listen to reconstructed choirs that sing as the ancients sang. What they find is not nostalgia, but a kind of longing, for a civilization that sought to unite heaven and earth, matter and spirit, faith and reason. The world that Byzantium built was flawed, but it was whole. And so, the story continues, not as history, but as inheritance. The marble has weathered, but the dream endures in cathedrals, in rituals, in memory. Each time light filters through a stained glass window, each time a painter gilds a halo, each time a scholar whispers the name of Justinian, Constantine, or Theodora, a fragment of Byzantium awakens again. For the empire that dreamed in marble was never merely a state. It was a vision of how the mortal might approach the divine, through beauty, through order, through endurance. And though its city fell, the dream it dreamed was too vast to die. It drifts still, through the corridors of history, like the echo of a prayer carved into stone. It waits in the shadows of museums, in the silence of churches, in the rhythm of languages shaped by Greek and Latin alike. And perhaps, in some quiet way, we too are still its subjects, wanderers in the empire of memory, citizens of the dream that marble once contained. For every civilization that rises believes it builds for eternity. Byzantium alone came closest to proving it. Its architects aimed not to defy time, but to converse with it. Each dome they raised was a question: can beauty save the world? Each mosaic was an answer whispered back: it already has. As night falls over the Bosphorus, lights glimmer on the water where the city once ruled the crossroads of continents. Minarets pierce the dark sky, where once bells rang for matins. And though the voices that speak the empire's language have changed, the cadence remains familiar, solemn, melodic, eternal. The marble has cooled, but beneath it, something still breathes. The empire is gone. But its dream, the dream of light in stone, of faith made visible, of time held still, endures. And perhaps that is what immortality truly means, not to reign forever, but to be remembered whenever beauty moves the human soul toward heaven. Byzantium still dreams. Not in marble, but in us. The city lies in silence. The wind moves softly through broken archways where mosaics once shimmered like captured dawn. The banners of conquerors rise above Hagia Sophia, but beneath the shadow of its great dome, the whisper of older prayers still lingers. The empire has fallen, but the dream has not died. From the ashes of Constantinople's last embers, a new kind of light begins to wander across the world, faint, flickering, yet persistent. It carries with it the breath of centuries, the hum of chants, the reflection of gold leaf on sacred walls. Byzantium, though broken in stone, endures in the mind. It becomes less a place, and more an idea. In Italy, the scholars who fled the doomed city carry with them scrolls, manuscripts, and the wisdom of 1,000 years. Among them are philosophers who once debated theology beneath the porches of the great palace, mathematicians who studied the movement of the heavens, artists who learned to make pigment dance like light. They arrive in Florence, in Venice, in Rome, exiles of an empire that dreamed too long in marble. They teach the West to remember what it had forgotten, that beauty can be divine reason made visible, that faith can be geometry, that the world can be redeemed through knowledge and art. From these refugees, the Italian Renaissance takes its breath. Greek becomes the language of rebirth. Plato walks again in the halls of Florence. And behind every brushstroke of Raphael, behind every column of Bramante, behind every verse of Dante's disciples, the ghost of Byzantium lingers, serene, unhurried, immortal. The Renaissance painters who study Byzantine icons do not merely imitate their faces, they absorb their silence. In those gold backgrounds and gentle halos lives the same light that once illuminated the domes of Constantinople. Yet the memory of Byzantium's fall never leaves Europe's conscience. It haunts the Western kings who watched the queen of cities collapse. For centuries they had prayed that the empire would stand as a bulwark between Christendom and the crescent. When it fell, it seemed that the old order itself had cracked, as if heaven had allowed marble to melt. But Byzantium's fall was not the end of faith. It was its transformation. In the lands of the Orthodox East, the spirit of the empire survives through ritual and prayer. Moscow proclaims itself the Third Rome, inheritor of the two that fell. The Tsars cloak themselves in purple robes reminiscent of imperial ceremony, their churches rise beneath onion domes inspired by Hagia Sophia's vast hemisphere. The Byzantines are gone, yet their vision of a world where throne and altar mirror heaven remains. The great liturgies of the Orthodox Church continue in Greek, Slavonic, and Georgian, their chants still echo the tones sung in Justinian's basilicas. Each time the priest lifts the chalice and the incense curls upward, Byzantium breathes again. The empire's territory is gone, but its theology, the belief that beauty itself is a pathway to God, survives unchanged. Through centuries of conquest and change, this spiritual continuity becomes Byzantium's true dominion. Its empire shifts from geography to imagination. Every monastery that preserves an illuminated manuscript, every scholar who whispers a Greek phrase, every pilgrim who stands awed beneath a dome filled with golden light, all become subjects of the empire that no sword could erase. It lives not in marble, but in memory. Even in the heart of the Ottoman capital, the conquerors who took the city cannot escape its aura. The Sultan who ordered Hagia Sophia's conversion into a mosque walks through its marble floor in silence. He looks upward into the dome where light glows like the breath of God, and though the symbols change, the architecture remains a prayer. He senses that this was no ordinary church, but a meeting place between heaven and earth. The Ottomans, too, inherit the empire's grandeur. They take its roads, its palaces, its laws, and make them their own. In time, the Byzantines' legacy flows through their veins as well, the architecture, the mosaics, the art of empire. The conqueror becomes the custodian of the conquered. Centuries pass. The empire of marble becomes an empire of ink. Western travelers, scholars, poets, and dreamers begin to rediscover Byzantium through fragments. Ruined columns stand half buried in ivy, faded icons glow faintly in candlelight. In dim monasteries atop Mount Athos, monks preserve scrolls that the world has forgotten. Their inked Greek letters, fragile and trembling, hold the wisdom of worlds that believed knowledge was a form of worship. To modern eyes, Byzantium becomes a paradox. Some call it a theocracy, others an empire of mystery and decadence. But those who listen closely hear something else, the heartbeat of endurance. For more than 1,000 years, the empire survived between continents, between faiths, between worlds. It was never just a continuation of Rome, nor simply the first Christian state. It was a dream of perfection in an imperfect world. A vision carved into stone and sung into liturgy. Even as its emperors fought wars and signed decrees, they believed their capital was an image of the celestial city described in Revelation, the New Jerusalem. Each dome mirrored the heavens, each mosaic reflected divine harmony. The empire dreamed in marble because it believed eternity could be built. Its architects measured walls in cubits of prayer. Its artists painted faces that never aged, for they represented souls illuminated by God. In their devotion to form, they turned faith into architecture and art into theology. When the walls finally fell, when the empire vanished into dust, the dream did not. It drifted westward, like a spark carried by wind, igniting minds that would transform Europe forever. The printing presses of the Renaissance spread Greek texts once preserved in Constantinople's libraries. Philosophers rediscovered Aristotle and Plotinus through Byzantine commentaries. Astronomers traced the stars using diagrams copied by monks who never saw the heavens except through the lattice of domes. In this way, Byzantium seeded the modern world. Yet something deeper remains, beyond the manuscripts and mosaics. It is the strange stillness of the empire, the sense that time itself once slowed there. To walk through a Byzantine church, even now, is to step into a world that moves differently. Light changes pace. Silence thickens into gold. Every sound, a footstep, a breath, feels sanctified. It is as though the empire taught the world not merely how to rule, but how to be still. In the modern age, when empires rise and fall in a matter of decades, Byzantium stands as a quiet rebuke. It endured for more than 1,000 years. Not because it was invincible, but because it understood continuity as an art. Its people believed that stability itself could be holy. The mosaic might crack, the marble might crumble, but the pattern, the order, remains. That is Byzantium's secret. Its beauty is not in survival, but in resurrection. Every few centuries, humanity rediscovers it, in the glint of an icon, in the echo of a chant, in the shadow of a dome. In our own time, historians and artists return once more to the golden age of Constantinople. They trace the delicate tesserae of forgotten mosaics, study the curved geometry of Hagia Sophia, listen to reconstructed choirs that sing as the ancients sang. What they find is not nostalgia, but a kind of longing, for a civilization that sought to unite heaven and earth, matter and spirit, faith and reason. The world that Byzantium built was flawed, but it was whole. And so, the story continues, not as history, but as inheritance. The marble has weathered, but the dream endures in cathedrals, in rituals, in memory. Each time light filters through a stained glass window, each time a painter gilds a halo, each time a scholar whispers the name of Justinian, Constantine, or Theodora, a fragment of Byzantium awakens again. For the empire that dreamed in marble was never merely a state. It was a vision of how the mortal might approach the divine, through beauty, through order, through endurance. And though its city fell, the dream it dreamed was too vast to die. It drifts still, through the corridors of history, like the echo of a prayer carved into stone. It waits in the shadows of museums, in the silence of churches, in the rhythm of languages shaped by Greek and Latin alike. And perhaps, in some quiet way, we too are still its subjects, wanderers in the empire of memory, citizens of the dream that marble once contained. For every civilization that rises believes it builds for eternity. Byzantium alone came closest to proving it. Its architects aimed not to defy time, but to converse with it. Each dome they raised was a question: can beauty save the world? Each mosaic was an answer whispered back: it already has. As night falls over the Bosphorus, lights glimmer on the water where the city once ruled the crossroads of continents. Minarets pierce the dark sky, where once bells rang for matins. And though the voices that speak the empire's language have changed, the cadence remains familiar, solemn, melodic, eternal. The marble has cooled, but beneath it, something still breathes. The empire is gone. But its dream, the dream of light in stone, of faith made visible, of time held still, endures. And perhaps that is what immortality truly means, not to reign forever, but to be remembered whenever beauty moves the human soul toward heaven. Byzantium still dreams. Not in marble, but in us. In the deep stillness after the fall, the empire lives on in fragments. A shattered crown beneath the dust of forgotten vaults, a mosaic face half buried in candle smoke, a single Greek word inscribed on marble long since cracked by centuries of footsteps. History has buried Byzantium, yet it refuses to be silent. It speaks in whispers, not to remind the world of its fall, but to teach it how something sacred can survive collapse. In the centuries after 1453, when the great city became Istanbul and Hagia Sophia's bells were silenced, a quiet transformation unfolded. The light that once poured through the dome of Justinian's basilica did not vanish, it simply changed direction. It flowed outward, seeping through the minds of scholars, artists, and pilgrims who carried within them the empire's final inheritance, the conviction that beauty was eternal. They scattered across the world like fragments of gold leaf, carried by wind and time. In distant lands, Byzantium's echoes found new shapes. Painters in Russia gilded their icons with the same reverence once found in Constantinople's workshops, their saints frozen in luminous stillness. They copied not merely the form, but the stillness of the Byzantine gaze, that strange, unblinking serenity that seemed to look beyond time itself. They learned that to paint a face was to preserve a soul. To light a candle before it was to summon eternity. In Western Europe, the scholars who inherited the city's manuscripts turned ink into rebirth. Greek philosophy, preserved by Byzantine scribes through invasions and plagues, re-entered the world like spring after a long winter. Aristotle, Plato, Ptolemy, Galen, names nearly lost, were spoken again. The Renaissance was born not in opposition to Byzantium, but in its shadow. Every cathedral that reached for the heavens, every dome that sought to trap light. Inside stone, every painter who found divinity in geometry, they were all, unknowingly, Byzantium reborn. Yet for those who remained within the Ottoman dominion, the memory of the empire persisted like a heartbeat under marble. In the narrow lanes of the Fanner, the Greek quarter of Istanbul, the descendants of the Byzantines still lit lamps before icons. They whispered prayers in Greek beneath the call to prayer in Arabic, their faith folded quietly into the rhythm of a new world. They did not call it resistance. They called it remembrance. Generations passed. Empires shifted. But the dream of Byzantium, that union of faith and form, seeped into every stone that replaced it. The Ottomans themselves became heirs of the imperial grandeur they conquered. Their architects learned from Byzantine engineers, their palaces echoed the balance of symmetry once perfected in Constantinople. When Sinan built the Suleimani Mosque, its dome was not a rejection of Hagia Sophia but a dialogue with it, one civilization speaking softly to another across centuries. Byzantium's soul had learned to survive by hiding in plain sight. Far to the north, in Moscow, the myth of the Third Rome took root. The Tsars declared that since Rome had fallen twice, once in Italy, once in Constantinople, Moscow now stood as the final guardian of the true faith. Its churches rose with gilded domes that burned like small suns in the winter sky. The Byzantine eagle took flight again, reborn with two heads, one watching east, one west. Its cry was not conquest, but continuity. Through ritual and architecture, the spirit of Byzantium had crossed continents without a single army. The empire that once spanned the Mediterranean now lived in the rhythm of liturgy and the silence of snow. Time, ever patient, began its work of softening memory. Marble eroded, frescoes faded, cities changed names. But every century, someone would wander among the ruins and feel something inexplicable, a kind of sacred nostalgia. The ruins did not merely speak of loss, they radiated presence. As if the empire had only stepped aside for a moment, leaving its shadow as a reminder. In this way, Byzantium became less a civilization and more a condition of the soul. To encounter its art was to glimpse a world that believed matter could still hold grace. Travelers who reached Istanbul in later centuries wrote of strange sensations. They found themselves silenced before Hagia Sophia's dome, as though its scale pressed the noise out of them. Some said it was not architecture at all, but an illusion, a miracle carved into geometry. Light filtered through its high windows in shafts that seemed almost conscious, descending with purpose, like angels remembering their path. In those moments, time folded. The traveler stood where emperors had stood, where priests once held the chalice, where conquerors prayed, and realized that all of history still pulsed within those stones. Beyond the city, Byzantium's voice wandered into monasteries perched on cliffs and islands. At Mount Athos, monks continued their ceaseless prayers, unbroken since the empire's days. Their chants, slow and resonant, carried across the Aegean winds, joining the same harmonies sung 1,000 years before. They needed no empire to endure, the empire lived through them. Each syllable, each tone, was an act of defiance against oblivion. In the West, romantic poets and historians rediscovered Byzantium with awe and confusion. To some, it was a symbol of mystery, an empire of gold and shadow. To others, it was decadence clothed in sanctity. But to the few who looked deeper, Byzantium represented something far rarer, the possibility that faith and art could exist without contradiction. Yeats would later call it, the artifice of eternity, imagining a soul that escapes the cycle of birth and decay by becoming art itself. And that was Byzantium's true miracle, not that it endured 1,000 years, but that it taught humanity how to make eternity visible. Modern empires rose, Spain, France, Britain, but none could claim that kind of immortality. Their borders expanded, then vanished. Their monuments eroded into politics and dust. Byzantium's strength was different, it did not depend on conquest, but on coherence. Its vision was so complete, so self-contained, that even when the world around it changed, it remained whole within itself. Its art was not decoration, it was theology in color. Its music was not entertainment, it was time suspended in devotion. Its politics may have faltered, but its spirit never lost its symmetry. In the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists began peeling away layers of paint and plaster, uncovering the brilliance of ancient mosaics hidden for centuries. Beneath the dust, gold still shimmered. The faces of saints, serene and unbroken, stared back at the modern world, not accusing, not pleading, merely witnessing. Each discovery felt less like excavation and more like resurrection. And as the restorers brushed away centuries of silence, they realized something astonishing: the colors had not faded. The gold was still pure. The empire had preserved its light, buried but unspoiled. Scholars debated its meaning. Was Byzantium the last breath of antiquity or the first dawn of modernity? But perhaps it was neither. Perhaps it was a bridge suspended between worlds, never belonging fully to past or future. In its cathedrals, you can still feel that suspension, as if the air itself hovers between seen and unseen. Byzantium refused to choose between heaven and earth, it decided to hold both. Today, when visitors stand inside Hagia Sophia, they sense that same impossible stillness. The space feels alive, breathing with light. The sound of footsteps fades before it even echoes. Tourists lift their phones, but the images they capture never match what the eye perceives. Because what they are seeing is not only stone and light, it is memory itself, luminous and patient. The empire still lives there, not in walls or relics, but in the pause it creates inside anyone who looks upward. Outside, the city roars with traffic and life. Ships cross the Bosphorus, planes trace lines across the sky. Empires of commerce and technology replace those of faith and sword. Yet somewhere in that constant motion, the quiet rhythm of Byzantium endures. Its lesson hums beneath the noise, that nothing truly sacred ever vanishes. It simply changes form, waiting to be recognized again. In the end, Byzantium teaches us a paradox, that to be eternal, one must accept transformation. Its marble cracked, its banners fell, its empire dissolved into the sea of time. But through those losses, its essence became free. It no longer needed borders or emperors. It became a pulse that moves through all civilizations that seek harmony between order and soul. And so, every time humanity builds something meant to last, a cathedral, a poem, a melody, it unknowingly rebuilds Byzantium. Every time light meets stone, or silence meets meaning, the empire awakens again. Because Byzantium was never truly about power. It was about presence, the belief that even in a fallen world, perfection can still be glimpsed. The last of its emperors died with his sword in his hand and prayer on his lips. But perhaps that was how the empire wished to end, not in surrender, but in transfiguration. For an empire that dreamed in marble could never truly die. It only becomes light and waits. And so the story continues, not in chronicles, but in the way the sun touches domes at dusk, in the echo of a hymn sung centuries too late, in the hush that falls when beauty commands silence. That is Byzantium's eternity. An empire built not to conquer, but to remind the world that the divine still hides within the mortal. And if you listen closely, beneath the noise of the modern age, you can still hear it breathing, softly, endlessly, the empire that dreamed in marble and woke as light. The empire that once crowned its domes in gold and marble has long since vanished from the earth, yet its spirit has refused to die. In the long twilight of history, when the dust of conquerors settles and the echoes of their banners fade, Byzantium continues to whisper through the centuries. It is the murmur of liturgy beneath the vaulted domes of distant churches, the shimmer of mosaics that refuse to dull, the unbroken chant of an idea that will not yield to time. The empire fell in flesh, but not in dream. Its ghost moves through the modern world like incense, weightless, fragrant, and impossible to contain. In the centuries that followed the fall, travelers from the west came to Constantinople expecting to find only ruins, but found instead a city still radiant with mystery. The Ottomans had taken the throne, the crescent gleamed where the cross once stood, and yet within the marble bones of Hagia Sophia, something older than conquest still breathed. Architects of the new empire felt it when they traced the curves of its dome, painters of the Italian Renaissance felt it when they gazed upon the remnants of Byzantine frescoes and learned that light itself could be divine. The seed of Byzantium had been scattered, but wherever it fell, beauty took root. In Florence, Venice, and Rome, exiled Greek scholars carried with them the last embers of an empire's wisdom. Their manuscripts, inked in trembling hands during the final nights before the fall, became the foundations of Europe's rebirth. They brought Plato back from silence, taught the lost tongue of Homer to Western ears, and whispered the geometries of the divine that Byzantium had guarded for 1,000 years. The Renaissance, so often hailed as the triumph of the West, was born from the ashes of the East. Every brushstroke in a Florentine chapel, every dome that rose toward heaven in imitation of Hagia Sophia, carried within it the pulse of a vanished empire. Byzantium, which had once defended the gates of Europe with sword and prayer, now conquered it with memory. Even those who sought to erase its traces found themselves reshaping the world in its image. The Ottomans, who had broken the walls of Constantinople with cannon and fire, soon made the Byzantine spirit their own. The architecture of their mosques, the ornamentation of their palaces, the balance of order and awe in their urban landscapes, all were children of Hagia Sophia. Sultan after sultan gazed upon that impossible dome and recognized in it not the monument of an enemy, but the embodiment of divine harmony. The conquerors became the inheritors. Thus the marble dream continued, clothed in new faith, but guided by the same celestial geometry. In Russia, the memory of Byzantium found another refuge. When the last emperor fell and the city of Constantine was lost, Moscow declared itself the Third Rome, the new guardian of the true faith. The Orthodox liturgy, chanted in dark cathedrals beneath icon-filled walls, carried the exact syllables once sung in the imperial chapels of Constantinople. The crowns of the tsars, the gilded onion domes that punctuated the Russian skyline, and the language of divine kingship all flowed from that same golden river. The Byzantine vision of sacred authority, where the ruler served as the reflection of heaven's order, took root in the snows of the north. The empire that once ruled the Mediterranean now ruled the imagination of a new civilization. Even the cold winds of Siberia could not extinguish that flame. But Byzantium's endurance was not only political or religious, it was metaphysical. It lived in symbols. In the shimmer of gold against deep blue, in the balance between human frailty and divine perfection, in the conviction that art could serve as a bridge between heaven and earth. When Western painters sought to master realism, the Byzantine iconographers had already understood transcendence. Their saints do not belong to flesh and shadow, they hover, luminous and eternal, eyes fixed on eternity. The modern world, in all its clamor and materiality, still turns to these faces for silence. In the age of digital light, their stillness remains defiant, reminding the restless heart of humankind that holiness is not a relic, but a direction. Throughout the 19th century, as archaeologists unearthed the stones of ancient empires, scholars began to rediscover Byzantium with new eyes. They expected to find a fossil and instead uncovered a mirror. Historians who once dismissed the empire as decadent now saw in its endurance the reflection of their own struggles. For 1,000 years, Byzantium had balanced between East and West, faith and reason, empire and apocalypse. It was the world's first great borderland, a civilization that lived on the fault line of history. And as modern nations emerged, torn between past and progress, they saw in Byzantium a warning and a prophecy. The empire that dreamed in marble had already faced what the modern world was only beginning to understand: the fragility of greatness, the price of survival, and the loneliness of enlightenment. Its art returned again, quietly, in the hands of visionaries who may never have spoken its name. The architects of Paris and London rediscovered the Byzantine dome, filtered through Renaissance memory and Islamic reimagining. The pre-Raphaelite painters gazed upon golden icons and sought to paint the sacred into modern life. In Russia, writers like Dostoevsky heard the Byzantine echo in the soul's struggle between sin and salvation. Even Nietzsche, in his quest for eternal recurrence, unwittingly touched a truth Byzantium had already known: that all empires, like all souls, live in cycles of death and resurrection. The 20th century brought iron and fire to the old world, and once more the marble dream seemed doomed. Wars tore across Europe, revolutions toppled crowns, and faith itself faltered beneath the shadow of modernity. Yet even in the darkest trenches, the Byzantine light glimmered. Soldiers painted icons on scraps of metal. Refugees carried small crosses through the ruins. In Istanbul, the great Hagia Sophia stood silent, a museum now, neither church nor mosque, but something between. Tourists walked beneath its dome, unaware that they stood in the center of an idea that had once held the world together. When the 21st century dawned, Byzantium returned, not in armies or empires, but in longing. Artists, filmmakers, historians, and dreamers began to rediscover the city that had once called itself the New Rome. They saw in its rise and fall the perfect parable of human striving, our hunger for eternity, our blindness to time, our endless attempt to build heaven in stone. The marble domes, the shimmering mosaics, the voices of monks chanting through centuries of night, all seem to say that beauty may die, but it never disappears. It changes form, migrates into new vessels, waits for new eyes to see. In Athens and Belgrade, in Tbilisi and Kiev, in monasteries carved into mountains and chapels hidden in cities, Byzantium still breathes. It breathes in lit candles, in whispered prayers, in the subtle curve of an arch designed 1,000 years ago. The empire's power no longer lies in armies or gold, but in memory, in the ability to haunt the imagination of those who seek meaning in the ruins. The modern traveler walking through Istanbul can feel it still, that quiet gravity, that hum of eternity that no empire before or since has quite captured. Perhaps that is Byzantium's final conquest, not the lands it ruled, but the hearts it continues to claim. Every time a hand reaches out to touch an ancient mosaic, every time a voice rises in the old hymns, every time an architect sketches a dome that dares to imitate the sky, the empire lives again. It no longer needs a throne or an emperor. It exists wherever faith meets form, wherever beauty becomes a form of resistance against decay. To dream of Byzantium today is to acknowledge that all civilizations are mortal, but some ideas are not. The empires of iron and oil that dominate our headlines will pass as surely as Rome and Constantinople once did. But the yearning that built Hagia Sophia, the desire to join heaven and earth, to make eternity visible, will not fade. It will take new shapes, perhaps digital or cosmic, but its essence will remain the same. Byzantium taught the world that the true empire is not one of conquest, but of consciousness. It ruled not by armies, but by imagination. As night falls over modern Istanbul, the lights of the city shimmer on the Bosporus like fragments of lost mosaics. The call to prayer drifts through the air, mingling with the distant bells of churches and the quiet hum of the modern world. Somewhere beneath the layers of asphalt and stone lies the heartbeat of Constantinople, the pulse of a city that once held the dreams of a continent. The marble has cracked, the paint has faded, the songs have changed, but the rhythm endures. For Byzantium was never merely a place. It was an idea of order against chaos, of beauty against oblivion, of faith against the grinding noise of time. And as long as humanity continues to build, to pray, to seek the eternal in the fleeting, the empire that dreamed in marble will not truly have fallen. Its light will continue to move unseen through the centuries, illuminating every hand that dares to create something that lasts. The empire may be gone, but its dream endures, eternal, patient, and quietly unconquered. The empire that dreamed in marble may have vanished beneath the tides of time, but its light still threads the veins of civilization. It burns quietly, like oil in an ancient lamp, illuminating corners of our world where few remember its name. The Byzantine flame did not die in 1453, it changed form, dispersing into the minds, the prayers, and the visions of those who came after. Every civilization that has ever tried to bind heaven to earth has, in some way, followed the lines Byzantium drew across the soul of history. In the silence after empires, what remains is art. In the broken domes of Constantinople, where birds now nest among mosaics, light still pours through windows designed to imitate divinity. That light is Byzantium's true inheritance, not the armies that marched in its name, not the emperors who claimed to rule by its grace, but the way it taught the human eye to see. To see in color the unseen world. To look at gold not as luxury, but as revelation. To use stone and sound to summon eternity. When the early Christians of the East first built their sanctuaries, they did not seek to imitate Rome's grandeur. They sought to transform it. The Roman arch became the Byzantine dome, the triumphal column became the apse that curved toward heaven. Every wall, every shimmer of tesserae, every flicker of candlelight in those sacred spaces was an attempt to render the invisible visible. Their cathedrals were not monuments, they were prayers turned into geometry. And that geometry still governs how humanity imagines the sacred. The Gothic cathedrals of France, with their soaring vaults and stained glass, are Byzantium translated into another tongue. The Renaissance masters who painted halos around their Madonnas were following the gold of Byzantine icons, long after they forgot its origin. Even the modern skyscraper, reaching upward in defiance of gravity, owes something to that same ancient yearning, the belief that structure can transcend substance, that stone can imitate the infinite. Yet Byzantium's legacy is not confined to art or architecture. It is a moral vision, a philosophy of existence that refuses to separate beauty from truth. For 1,000 years, the Byzantines believed that beauty was a path to God, that to behold the world in harmony was itself a kind of prayer. This belief shaped their politics, their theology, even their wars. Their empire stood for an ideal that the material and the divine were not opposed, but intertwined, that the world itself was a reflection of a hidden order. That is why their cities gleamed with marble when their coffers were nearly empty. That is why monks spent lifetimes painting faces that would never move. That is why emperors risked their crowns to defend a single word in a creed. To them, perfection was not luxury, it was duty. Every dome, every icon, every melody of liturgy was a fragment of heaven brought down to earth. This vision passed silently into the bloodstream of humanity. The Byzantine artist painted for eternity, not for fame. The Byzantine thinker argued for truth, not victory. The Byzantine ruler saw himself as a servant of divine order, not merely a conqueror. These ideas, though buried under centuries of change, resurface again and again, in monasteries that still chant in the old language, in philosophers who search for unity beneath division, in scientists who glimpse order within chaos. In the modern world, where faith and reason often drift apart, Byzantium whispers of their ancient marriage. It reminds us that logic need not destroy wonder, that light can illuminate both scripture and science. The empire's scholars preserved Euclid and Aristotle, translated the medicine of Galen, and safeguarded the astronomy of the ancients. Without them, the Renaissance might never have dawned. The very maps that guided explorers across oceans were drawn from knowledge kept alive in Byzantine scriptoria. Every compass that pointed west toward discovery also pointed east toward memory. Yet Byzantium's greatest legacy may lie not in what it built, but in how it endured. Few civilizations have faced so many catastrophes, plague, invasion, betrayal, and collapse, yet still managed to reinvent themselves. The empire's survival for over 1,000 years was not mere luck, it was resilience elevated to art. Its people learned to rebuild without forgetting, to change without surrendering their essence. When armies breached their walls, they retreated into faith. When emperors fell, monks carried the torch. When the city itself was lost, the idea of it migrated into the minds of those who refused to let it die. That idea, that civilization is not stone but spirit, became one of humanity's most enduring truths. When revolutions shattered monarchies, when wars reduced cities to ash, when the world seemed to dissolve into chaos, the memory of Byzantium offered a different kind of hope. Not the hope of power, but of continuity. A reminder that culture can outlive conquest, that beauty can outlast brutality, that faith can be rebuilt from ruin. In the 19th and 20th centuries, poets and painters rediscovered the empire through longing. W.B. Yeats dreamed of sailing to Byzantium, not to study history, but to escape mortality. To him, Byzantium was not a place on the map, it was the symbol of eternal art, a city where the soul is made of gold and the body of song. Once out of nature, he wrote, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing. He sought to become, in spirit, an artifact of Byzantium, perfect, immortal, serene. In that single poem, the empire's legacy crossed from theology into imagination. Every generation that follows reaches back to Byzantium in times of crisis. When Europe burned in 2 world wars, scholars again turned to its chronicles, searching for wisdom in its endurance. When architecture lost its soul to glass and steel, designers looked again at its domes, rediscovering how geometry could be spiritual. When modernity fractured truth into 1,000 opinions, philosophers recalled the Byzantine synthesis, the idea that knowledge and mystery can coexist. In our own era, the legacy survives in the most unexpected places. The icons that once adorned monasteries now circulate as digital images, yet their eyes still follow us through the glow of screens. The chants that once echoed through candlelit cathedrals now play softly through headphones, guiding restless minds toward peace. Hagia Sophia stands again as a place of worship, its dome catching the same morning light it did 15 centuries ago. And in cities far from the Bosporus, new churches rise, still tracing the curvature of that eternal roofline, that symbol of heaven's embrace. Even beyond religion, Byzantium's influence lingers. It shaped the concept of international diplomacy, the rituals of coronation, the very idea of empire as moral mission. The ceremonial robes of European monarchs, the architecture of capitals from Vienna to Washington, the music that opens liturgies across continents, all bear traces of its invisible hand. Wherever beauty carries the weight of meaning, wherever symmetry becomes a language of reverence, Byzantium is present. But its legacy also carries a warning. The empire that stood for divine order fell because it mistook permanence for destiny. It forgot that marble can crack, that harmony can become rigidity, that faith without renewal can harden into pride. Its greatest strength, its belief in eternity, became its greatest peril. When the tides of change rose, the empire resisted instead of adapting. And so it teaches us this, that no civilization, no matter how radiant, is immune to time. The only true immortality lies in transformation. Perhaps that is why Byzantium continues to haunt us. It is both the dream and the caution. It shows us what human hands can achieve when guided by the idea of the divine, and what they can lose when they mistake form for spirit. Its story is a mirror for our own age, a world of dazzling technology and fragile meaning, of vast power and uncertain faith. We, too, build in marble and code, we, too, reach for eternity through our inventions, and we, too, must ask whether our creations serve light or merely reflect it. And yet, despite all the centuries that divide us, Byzantium still speaks with a voice we can understand. It tells us that beauty matters, not as luxury, but as necessity. That the measure of a civilization is not how high its towers rise, but how deeply its light penetrates the soul. That empires may crumble, but the longing for transcendence endures. It tells us that there will always be a dome somewhere, whether in stone, in thought, or in the heart, where the human spirit looks upward and whispers a prayer it cannot fully understand. So when you stand beneath a great dome and feel your breath catch, when you hear a choir sing in a language older than memory, when you see sunlight strike gold and think, for just an instant, that time has stopped, you are standing in Byzantium. Not the empire of emperors, but the empire of light. The place where art and faith, reason and wonder, meet and recognize one another. The place that exists wherever humanity remembers that it was born not only to survive, but to seek the eternal. In the quiet of night, as the modern world hums with restless motion, that ancient city still dreams. Its walls are gone, but its spirit travels through every cathedral, every icon, every soul that hungers for meaning. The mosaics shimmer not in marble now, but in memory, fragments of a vision that refuse to fade. And though the sea has swallowed its ports, and its emperors sleep beneath forgotten stones, Byzantium endures in the only way that truly matters, as light reflected endlessly through time. For that is its true conquest, not of territory, but of perception. Not of kingdoms, but of consciousness. The empire that dreamed in marble taught humanity to build for heaven even while living on earth. Its legacy is the stillness within beauty, the silence beneath splendor, the certainty that beneath all change there lies an unchanging light. And so, across the centuries, its whisper continues, empires fall, but the dream endures. The city is quiet. Dawn lingers just beyond the horizon, its first light gathering like breath upon the waters of the Bosporus. The air carries the scent of salt and stone, and somewhere in the distance, a single bell tolls, a sound so faint it might be memory itself. The world has changed 1,000 times since the emperors of Byzantium last walked these streets, and yet, as the morning mist rises, it feels as though time has only paused, not passed. The marble sleeps, but it still remembers. I walk where the ancient processions once moved in splendor, where golden banners once caught the light of the rising sun. The streets beneath my feet are no longer lined with imperial guards or silken-robed patriarchs, yet their shadows remain, gentle, ghost-like, woven into the breath of the city. The stones murmur softly with every step, their voices low and patient, as if telling stories to anyone still willing to listen. The call to prayer drifts through the cool air, a ribbon of sound unfurling over the domes. It echoes across the golden horn, mingling with the whisper of the wind that glides through the alleys of the old city. And in that moment, between light and darkness, between what was and what remains, the veil grows thin. For a heartbeat, I hear them. The faint chorus of 1,000 monks singing in the great cathedral, their voices rising like smoke toward the vast dome of Hagia Sophia. It is not an illusion. It is memory, awakened. The city is eternal in its forgetting and remembering. Layers of faith, of empire, of human longing are stacked like manuscripts written one upon the other. The Ottomans built upon the Byzantines upon the Romans upon the Greeks, and beneath them all, the same earth, the same hunger for meaning. This city is not one civilization. It is all of them. The empire that dreamed in marble still dreams here, though its name is a whisper now, carried in the wind between minaret and bell tower. I walk toward the old heart of the world. The streets narrow, and the domes begin to rise, gray, golden, solemn. There she stands, Hagia Sophia. She does not belong to a single faith anymore, nor even to a single age. She is the embodiment of continuity, of the sacred that refuses to vanish. Her stones are worn smooth by centuries of prayer, Christian, Muslim, human. I stand before her and feel small, as if the earth itself were breathing through her walls. The sky blushes with the first gold of dawn, and the light touches the dome. It glows softly, as though the sun itself kneels before it. For a moment, the entire world feels weightless. The marble glows not with the brilliance of the past, but with the serenity of acceptance. Once this was the greatest cathedral in Christendom, later one of Islam's most magnificent mosques, now a symbol that belongs to neither and to both. In its silence lies reconciliation. Inside, the air is heavy with centuries. The faint scent of incense still lingers, trapped within the pores of the stone. The walls shimmer with fading mosaics, gold and sapphire and crimson, saints half revealed beneath the patterns of calligraphy. Time has not erased them, it has blended them. Christ and the Caliph share the same space, as if both reached for the same unseen light. The empire fell, the city changed hands, but here, in this stillness, the divine remains indivisible. A single ray of sunlight pierces through the high windows and lands upon the floor. Dust motes swirl within it like drifting souls. I close my eyes, and for a moment, I can almost hear the great liturgy once more, the slow rhythm of chants, the trembling of candles, the echo of footsteps upon marble floors. The sound of the imperial choir, the rustle of vestments, the hush before the Eucharist. Then it fades, absorbed by the vast silence that has followed for centuries. Outside, the city stirs. Fishermen cast their lines into the waking sea. Vendors begin to open their stalls, filling the streets with the smell of bread and roasted beans. The modern world hums to life, unaware that it stands upon the bones of eternity. Yet in the quiet hours of dawn, when traffic has not yet claimed the streets and the sky still carries the color of old dreams, the city remembers. It remembers not through monuments, but through silence. Byzantium, in the end, was not destroyed, it was transformed. Every empire that falls teaches the world something about the soul. Rome taught us law. Egypt taught us permanence. Byzantium taught us how to endure through beauty. Its triumph was never measured in conquests, but in its refusal to let go of light. Even in decline, it adorned its walls with gold, sang hymns to the unbroken heavens, and sought meaning in every fragment of ruin. It believed that the divine could dwell within imperfection. And perhaps that is why it still survives, in art, in faith, in every heart that still believes the world can be sanctified through love. As I walk along the ancient harbor, I imagine the ships of old, imperial fleets bearing purple sails, monks carrying relics, merchants crossing the waters with silks and spices. The sea is calm now, but its depths hold centuries of sunken stories. Beneath these waves lie the remnants of the Byzantine walls, the lost harbors, the broken statues of forgotten saints. Each stone below carries an echo of the city above, as if the past and the present are reflections of each other, endlessly entwined. When night comes, the city glows again, not with the fire of conquest, but with the quiet hum of continuity. The Bosporus mirrors the lights of Istanbul, 1,000 reflections shimmering upon the water like candles in an infinite vigil. It is as if the city itself is praying. And perhaps it is. Every ripple, every whisper of tide against stone feels like a litany in a language older than empire. Sometimes, I think the empire never truly ended. It simply dissolved into the rhythm of the world, into the architecture of our dreams, the cadence of our music, the geometry of our prayers. Every dome that rises against the sky, every mosaic that catches the light, every soul that reaches upward with reverence is a continuation of that ancient longing. Byzantium has no need for thrones or crowns anymore. It lives wherever light is treated as sacred. I find myself on a hill overlooking the city as the stars begin to fade. Below, the domes of Hagia Sophia, the Blue Mosque, and the modern skyline form a constellation of human striving. 3 civilizations, Roman, Ottoman, modern, layered like translucent veils, all gazing toward the same horizon. The empire that dreamed in marble now dreams in glass and steel, yet its heart beats unchanged. The wind picks up, carrying the mingled sounds of the city, the call to prayer, the ringing of a bell, the laughter of a child. In that blend of faiths, in that harmony of contradictions, I hear Byzantium's final prayer, not for victory, but for remembrance. It whispers that beauty is not bound by time, that the sacred cannot be claimed by any one name, and that every fall is but another form of becoming. As dawn breaks fully, the light spills across the city, flooding the domes, the alleys, the bridges. The Bosporus turns to gold. Seagulls rise into the glowing air, their wings catching the first fire of the morning sun. And in that moment, standing between continents, I feel what the emperors once dreamed and the monks once sang, that eternity is not a place we go to, but something we awaken within ourselves. Byzantium is not lost. It is here, in the silence between heartbeats, in the shimmer of light upon marble, in the yearning that draws humanity ever upward. It is the echo that refuses to fade, the prayer that continues long after the words have been forgotten. And as the day begins, the empire that dreamed in marble breathes once more, not in power, but in peace. Its voice, soft as dawn, speaks still, beauty endures, faith transforms, and nothing sacred is ever truly lost. The sea answers in silence, and the sun climbs higher. The world moves on. But Byzantium remains, quiet, eternal, unconquered. The night is quiet once more. The city sleeps beneath a blanket of faint gold, its skyline a silhouette of domes and minarets against the restless glow of the modern world. The Bosporus moves like black glass, carrying the reflected shimmer of 1,000 lights. Yet beneath the hum of engines, the laughter, the pulse of neon and steel, there is a deeper rhythm, slow, ancient, enduring. It is the rhythm of Byzantium, still breathing beneath the skin of time. The marble dreams again. Once, this city believed that heaven could be built on earth. Its people carved prayers into stone, painted eternity onto walls, and filled the air with hymns that trembled like stars. They lived not only to survive, but to illuminate. Every column, every dome, every mosaic was a meditation in matter, a declaration that beauty could defy decay. To walk through Constantinople was to walk through theology made visible, an empire woven from light itself. And even now, in the quiet hours when the city drifts toward dawn, you can still feel that faith humming through the ground. There are places in the world that forget time, and places that remember. Byzantium remembers. It remembers the trembling hands that built its churches, the poets who sang of divine order, the sailors who saw its golden walls glimmering from miles away. It remembers the tears of those who watched it fall. It remembers every candle ever lit within its shadow, and every prayer whispered to the unbroken sky. The marble has absorbed it all, the glory, the grief, the devotion, and turned it into something that outlasts history. To understand Byzantium is to understand the human condition itself, the struggle to reconcile the transient and the eternal. The empire rose from the ruins of Rome, inherited its power, and yet transformed its soul. Here, politics became sacrament, art became theology, and architecture became a form of worship. The Byzantines built not to dominate the earth, but to mirror the heavens. Their domes were not shelters, they were symbols of infinity. The mosaics of their saints shimmered not with the vanity of ornament, but with the conviction that divine light could dwell within matter. It is this paradox, the union of the fragile and the eternal, that keeps Byzantium alive. Other empires sought to rule the body, Byzantium sought to rule the spirit. It is why its echoes remain even when its armies have turned to dust. We find it in the melody of a Gregorian chant, in the arches of a Russian cathedral, in the solemn geometry of an Islamic mosque, and in the awe that quiets the human heart in the presence of beauty. Standing now in Hagia Sophia, centuries after the fall, you feel it still. The light descends from the dome like liquid fire, soft yet absolute. It doesn't illuminate, it sanctifies. The marble walls are cracked, the mosaics faded, but the space itself feels alive, aware, conscious. Every footstep becomes a whisper. Every shadow feels inhabited. The silence is not absence, it is presence. In this stillness, one realizes that Byzantium was never simply a civilization, it was an idea of the divine made tangible. And what is the divine, if not the dream of unity? That was Byzantium's true empire, the belief that the material and the spiritual could coexist, that heaven could be mirrored on earth, that time could hold eternity. It failed as all human empires must, but in its failure, it revealed something greater. It proved that the dream itself was indestructible. When the last emperor, Constantine XI, fell defending the city walls in 1453, legend says he did not die but was turned into marble, sleeping beneath the Golden Gate, waiting for the day he will rise again. It is a myth, yes, but perhaps also a metaphor, that the spirit of Byzantium never truly perished, only slept within the hearts of those who still search for light in a darkening world. The marble emperor is not one man, but all of us, dreamers who refuse to believe that beauty must yield to oblivion. As centuries passed, the world changed its language, its gods, its empires. Steamships crossed the straits where triremes once sailed. Towers of glass rose where mosaics once gleamed. Yet somehow, the Byzantine sensibility, the quiet reverence for order, for light, for sacred geometry, endured. It passed into art, into architecture, into the silent awe that falls over anyone who steps into a vast space filled with light and shadow. Every modern cathedral, every domed mosque, every building that dares to make the invisible visible is Byzantium's descendant. But the true survival of Byzantium lies not in buildings or books, it lies in the human longing for transcendence. In every heart that looks upon a sunset and feels that the moment is sacred, Byzantium breathes. In every artist who paints light as if it were holy, Byzantium endures. In every philosopher who believes that beauty is a form of truth, the marble empire lives again. Its borders are no longer drawn on maps, but within the soul. As night deepens, I walk along the shore. The waves lap gently against the stones, whispering secrets in a language older than empires. The skyline glows faintly across the water. Somewhere, a fisherman hums an old hymn, unaware that his melody echoes one sung 1,000 years ago by monks in a monastery now long forgotten. The sound drifts over the sea, fragile yet eternal. This is Byzantium's music, never loud, never gone. Always returning, always remade. In a world obsessed with progress, Byzantium teaches the value of permanence. In an age that worships innovation, it reminds us of continuity. Its faith was not in change, but in endurance. The Byzantines believed that every stone, every icon, every chant could be a vessel for the eternal. And perhaps that is why, even after its fall, the empire continues to feel alive, because it built for something beyond itself. The modern traveler walking through Istanbul may not recognize it, but they walk through layers of prayer. Beneath every street lies a forgotten church. Beneath every mosque lies a fragment of an older temple. Beneath every step, the empire sleeps. And when the wind blows across the Bosporus at night, the marble dream stirs, remembering. We often imagine the past is gone, but Byzantium proves that time is not a straight line. It folds. It echoes. It returns. The empire's fall is only one note in a larger symphony. Its song continues through those who listen, through artists who still seek divine symmetry, through historians who rediscover its wisdom, through ordinary people who light candles in darkened rooms and feel the universe watching back. The greatest lesson Byzantium left us is not how to rule, but how to see. To see the sacred in the ordinary, to find heaven in a reflection of sunlight on stone, to understand that every act of creation is a form of prayer. Its people believed that beauty was the visible face of the invisible God. And when we stand in awe before a great work of art or a quiet moment of grace, we are joining their eternal liturgy. The empire dreamed in marble, but its true architecture was made of light. And light cannot die. It travels endlessly, unseen yet unforgotten, crossing centuries as easily as it crosses air. Somewhere tonight, a candle flickers before an icon, a child gazes upward into a dome painted with stars, a scholar opens an old manuscript whose letters still glow faintly gold. Each of these moments is a continuation of that dream. As dawn approaches, I look once more toward the city. The horizon glows pale and soft. The call to prayer begins, rising gently through the air, joined by the distant ringing of church bells. For a fleeting instant, their sounds blend perfectly, two faiths, two histories, one melody. That harmony is Byzantium's final miracle. It reminds us that all divisions are illusions, that beneath every belief lies the same yearning for light. The sun breaks over the water. The domes catch fire. The marble gleams. And the dream awakens once again. The empire is gone, yet it remains in every act of creation, in every heart that refuses to surrender beauty to time. It lives in silence, in music, in light. The marble dream continues, not as empire, not as faith, but as the eternal human desire to touch the divine through what we build, what we love, and what we remember. The world moves forward, but Byzantium lingers, quietly, patiently, like a prayer still rising through the centuries. Its light has no name, no border, no end. It is the light that calls across the waters at dawn. The light that trembles in the mosaics of our memory. The light that once turned marble into music, and still turns silence into grace. It is the immortal light of Byzantium. And it will shine, forever.